Hey friends, welcome back. I've been wanting to talk more about politics on my channel. I already do talk about it quite a bit when it relates to TV shows and movies that I react to, but I also wanted to talk more about like singular issues without attaching it to a work of fiction. And yeah, with the 2020 election ramping up, I thought this was a good time to take a look at our healthcare system in the United States. So yeah, if you guys live in the United States, or even if you don't, you most likely know that our healthcare system is kind of an atrocity. We're the only country in the world where you can go bankrupt from getting sick. Healthcare costs are way too high, and racial and economic inequality gets even worse from it, from all these issues as well. So just to give you some examples, 1 in 4 people who are diabetic ration their insulin, which you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to ration your insulin. A lot of people wind up getting irreversibly sick from that. A lot of people wind up dying. But yeah, insulin is just too expensive in the United States compared to other countries, and there's no reason why. Well, there is a reason why, but it's not a good reason. So often it's either you're paying your other bills or you're getting proper treatment. People sometimes choose not to pay their electric bill for a couple months so that they can afford to survive, literally, with the insulin. And so Bernie Sanders, he's been taking people across the border to Canada to get their medication for a long time now, going back to the 80s. One of the more recent trips that made the news was him taking diabetic patients up, or their families up north to Canada. And so people got insulin at a much cheaper rate there. Some family got a 6-month supply for about $1,000, and they said it was still a lot, but at least it would have been at least 10 times more expensive if they had bought it in the US. So it's completely ridiculous. And like, this is medicine that people need to live. And yeah, another story, my dad had a cancer scare a couple months ago, and we were kind of in panic mode. We thought it's possible that we might get bankrupt, we might lose our apartment, because we've seen horror stories of people paying hundreds of thousands of dollars despite having insurance, because one of their family members got cancer. And my dad eventually was just saying that if he did have cancer, to just let him die, because again, even though we have insurance, the cost of treatment would be too much to deal with. And so luckily, yes, we're in the clear. He does not have any cancer, but the fact that our system is so messed up that his thinking was actually pretty realistic and pretty common among everyday Americans, there's something sick and wrong with that. There are people out there who are willing to choosing to die over paying for treatment. There are people who refuse to tell their family that they're sick because they know their family would force them to stop working, and that family can't afford to lose their paycheck. And yeah, there are just tons of cases where people choose not to go to the doctor because they're afraid it'll cost them too much. I'm actually going to play a video for you guys that went viral the last few months. It's people in the UK being asked how much medical treatment costs in the United States. So yeah, check it out.
An inhaler.
$100.
Yeah, you're pretty close. It's a bit more.
120.
250 to 350.
For an inhaler?
Yes.
Man, so if you're poor, you're dead.
So 2 EpiPens. Okay. How much do you reckon they are?
$80.
600.
$40.
I'm afraid not.
More?
More?
$100.
More.
150.
More.
250.
More.
Shut the fridge.
More.
£300.
Double it.
$600. Yeah. What? Why?
That's a very good question.
$600.
Yeah. Cost of childbirth.
Jesus. 50 grand, something ridiculous now?
Yeah, see, I've blown the figures up on your head now, haven't I? Because they're larger. It's the highest, generally speaking, is about 30 grand.
Oh, okay.
Is that reasonable? You haven't?
Not reasonable at all. It's just like now we're on a benchmark.
100, 200.
Dollars.
Yeah.
The average is about 10 grand. It can go up to 30,000.
10 grand for a baby.
Yeah, well, I guess. How much is your child worth?
Yeah. What, is that like the same everywhere?
Yeah, the average is about $10,000. Yeah.
That's mad. Oh, no thanks.
I wonder if you could tell me how expensive you think calling an ambulance out to your location is in America?
I guess it depends on like where you live. It really does. Is there a price for that?
Yes,
Jeez, $100, $200.
$2,500.
For what? Why? Why?
What do you think of the people who are profiting off the sale of these medicines?
You bastards. I sorry, beep. I think I think they should be stopped.
So yeah, the absolutely ridiculous price points for our medical care that we take for granted in this country are ludicrous in other parts of the world. Our costs per person for healthcare is over $10,000 per person, per capita. And on average, that's twice that of other countries in the world. And we don't even cover everybody. Like a Harvard study showed that 45,000 people die per year because they're uninsured or underinsured. And we still have millions of people who are not insured whatsoever. So yeah, it's a huge problem. And you could see with a lot of these price differences why some people who can afford to travel choose to do that to get treatment. But like the United States is the richest country in the history of the world. Like, don't tell me we can't have affordable healthcare for everybody when the vast majority of other countries in the world are capable of it. So yeah, maybe I'm insane, but I think when people are sick, they should be focusing on getting better, not on how they're going to navigate the health insurance and all the paperwork and everything that has to do with it. They should be worried about how they shouldn't be worried about how they're going to pay for it. They should be, focusing on getting better. Now, why is our healthcare system the way it is? The big reason is that we have private healthcare insurance companies, and their goal is not to provide care for everybody. Their goal is to make as much money as possible. And how do they do that? Well, first, they lobby our politicians, aka bribe our politicians, so that most of our politicians won't even consider changing this broken system. And then the insurance companies try to deny as many claims as possible, of course. Their system and customer service is purposefully convoluted so that you likely can't get the treatment you want, or you wind up having to pay out of pocket. And it's even worse for mental health treatment. I will always remember this story. This young girl tried to commit suicide but failed, and her doctor recommended treatment at a facility. But the health insurance company denied it, saying her case wasn't serious enough. So if she tried to kill herself, and that isn't enough to get her treatment, like at what point is it serious enough that this health insurance company is going to cover this treatment? It's just ridiculous. And then they hire people to be claims adjusters to deny as many people as possible. They hire lobbyists, and all this money gets pumped into things that shouldn't be necessary in a healthcare system. And so what is the solution? Well, the solution, what we need is a single payer system. This would mean getting rid of all the private healthcare insurance companies. And politicians have been talking about this for a long time, but they largely gave up due to getting lobbied. And there were a few people who still pushed for it, a few politicians who still pushed for it, but it didn't come to the forefront of American politics until Bernie Sanders campaigned for it in the 2016 presidential election. His bill is called Medicare for All. So Medicare, this very, very popular healthcare plan that is right now for the elderly, would be slowly expanded over the course of 4 years so that it covers everybody. Pramila Jayapal, a congresswoman, also has a version of the bill for Congress. And those are the two best bills out there right now. Now, some of you might be thinking Medicare for All, isn't that's proposal that's going to bankrupt our country? Not exactly. But if you've heard those things, it's because the way our government is set up, any legislation that would help everyday people but hurt the rich is constantly smeared. So the rest of the video, I'll explain why Medicare for All is necessary and why the claims lobbied against it are false. Then I'll get into other versions of the plan and why they won't work, and how they'll actually make our healthcare system even worse. I'm talking about specifically Pete Buttigieg's Medicare for All who want it and things like that. So first of all, how do we pay for it? Corporate news always asks this. They frame it as it's going to bankrupt the country. So estimates say that it's going to cost, Medicare for All is going to cost $32 trillion in the next 10 years, which sounds like a lot, right? 3.2 trillion a year, that's too much. It is going to bankrupt our country, right? Well, in 2019, under our current system, we already spent $3.6 trillion on healthcare, and it's projected to be 3.82 trillion in 2019. And so both of those are already more than the yearly average for Medicare for all, and it's projected to climb in the coming years. So economists have our current system costing us $6 trillion a year by the end of the decade, and so it's going to cost around $48 trillion over the next 10 years. So $48 trillion over the next 10 years under our current system, or $32 trillion for Medicare for all. So Medicare for all would save us $16 trillion over the next 10 years and give access to healthcare for everybody. And Bernie's plan also adds dental, eyeglasses, and hearing aids to the Medicare plan, which it doesn't currently cover. So we'd pay less as a country. And so it's not going to bankrupt our country, obviously. But what about everyday people? We keep hearing that our taxes are going up under Medicare for all. And yes, that's true. Our taxes will go up. But on the other hand, we won't have to pay for premiums. We don't have to pay for copays, deductibles, co-insurance, all those things that we currently have to pay under our current healthcare system. And the corporate media will say, Canada pays so much more in taxes. Do you want to pay that much more in taxes? And my answer is, heck yes, I do, because it would mean that everybody in our country is covered. And also, it would save me money because I wouldn't have to pay for health insurance separate from my taxes. So Canada's taxes are higher because health insurance is included in their taxes. If we count our health insurance costs as part of our taxes, our tax rate is actually higher. So you pay your taxes, but you save all the money that you would have paid for under our current system. If it sounds like I'm trying to overemphasize this, it's because for some reason, people just hear higher taxes and freak out. So, okay, if we get Medicare for all, you will have more money. I feel like I need to really shake some people sometimes for them to understand. The only way you wind up paying more than you do now is if your household makes more than $194,000 a year. $194,000. That's the top 5% of earners in our country, so most likely if you're watching this, you're not making that much. And if you're making more than that, and that's why you're against Medicare for all, I mean, just have some more compassion. I don't know what else to tell you, because paying slightly more in taxes so that everybody else in the country can go to the doctor without being afraid, people don't die from being uninsured, I would gladly do that if I made that much. Obviously, the higher your income, the more you pay. But these are people who are rich, so they can afford it. And I'm gonna make an analogy. We'll see how far it goes and when it falls apart. So earlier in our history, firefighting was privately owned and paid for. So what that meant was, private businesses owned fire stations. But what they found out was that rich people saw their fires put out, but fires in poor neighborhoods frequently weren't attended to, or they were slow response times. So what the government did was create a government-run fire department when there's a fire, your local fire department puts it out, and it's not subject to, you're rich or you're poor, then you get different types of services. So what we want to do with healthcare, Medicare for all, right now, privately owned companies are going where they can make money and people are slipping through the cracks, just like they did when firefighters were privately owned. I hear some people, but isn't this socialism? I can hear you asking this already, but no, it's not, because socialism means that everyday people control the means of production, and that's not the case here. And even if it was socialism, honestly, the US has so many people who are afraid of socialism because there were socialist leaders in other countries who wound up being terrible, but they weren't terrible because they were socialist. They were terrible because they were fascist dictators. So again, why do so many people in the United States think socialism is bad? Again, corporate media. They wanted to push forward capitalism as the way because that's what's making them rich, honestly. But for everyday people, capitalism is what's failing us with our healthcare system. People are making so much money while people die. And capitalism is what lets Jeff Bezos make $215 million a day. $215 million a day. And still have Amazon pay zero in taxes. So, federal taxes, we'll say. Now, capitalism and socialism both have their flaws and their advantages, but we need to examine those case by case. It's not going to work if you just paint with broad brushstrokes like capitalism bad, socialism bad. It's not true, and it doesn't work. So, in the case of things that people need to live, I believe they cannot be run by the private sector, because in the private sector, the goals are to make as much profit as possible. And like I said before, we've seen how that works with healthcare. You can't trust every company out there to look after anything except their own interests. So yeah, right now, drug companies or private healthcare companies will drive up prices as much as they can so they can make a profit. And you can't put a price on how much someone values their health or their lives. If the 6-month supply of insulin I mentioned earlier was not $10,000, but was $20,000, $30,000, people would still do whatever they could to pay it. Or it'd drive them to just give up because they see no way out. So, yeah, it's just a part of trying to build a more humane society. But, yeah, what other things do people say about Medicare for All? Oh, yeah, people love their health insurance. You can't just take it away. Medicare for All would get rid of all the private health insurance companies? So that is a myth completely, because nobody loves their health insurance. They love their doctors. They want to keep going to the doctors they've always gone to. They want to go to the doctors they trust. And private health insurance doesn't even guarantee that you keep your doctor, because millions of people lose their private health insurance every year. If you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. And even if you don't lose your job, your company might just decide it wants to change insurances to save money. Then you're forced to change, and it's possible you can't go to the same doctor anyway. And like, what if you're married to someone who is abusive, but you get health insurance through their work that you actually need? Or heck, what if you're just unhappy in your marriage and you want to get out, but you need their health insurance? Or what if you hate your work? Your boss is like sexually harassing you, or it's just an abusive environment, but you rely on your health insurance to not die? You just can't quit. You're forced to stay. And like, what if you want to start a business, but doing so would mean, yeah, you don't have a job, so you have no health insurance. So under Medicare for All, you won't lose your coverage no matter what. You want to move to another state? No problem. You want to quit your job to go back to college? No problem. You just had a kid? Well, you don't have to pay the $10,000 it costs to have a baby in the first place under our current system. And you can take less hours or even quit your job without losing your health insurance. And it's also great for the economy because the economic boot of healthcare is off your throat. People will have more money to spend, and most importantly, people can make decisions that are best for them and not make decisions based on fear. And also, companies, big corporations like to weaponize their health insurance to make sure that their employees stay in line. So there was a story in the recent few months that I forget which company it was, but their workers went on strike. They wanted to unionize, and the company didn't want to let them. And so what they did when they went on strike was to cut their health insurance, which seems highly illegal. But so big corporations actually like paying for part of your private health insurance because they can use it as leverage to get you back to work, to make sure you listen to what they say, don't put your toe out of line. And it's just a very corrupt system to make sure that people at the top all have all the power. And so, yeah, comparing all the options right now, I'll start with Joe Biden's plan. It's essentially tweaked Obamacare, which still leaves millions of people with no insurance. It's pretty much what we have now, maybe improved a little bit, so a big no from me. We have Medicare for All, proposed by Bernie Sanders, back into the public forefront, and because of him and because of the movement he's inspired, 70% of people in the US now support it, which is a lot, 70%. Like, you have to jump on board because otherwise you're against the will of the people. You can't do that and still expect to be voted back into office. Except, here we go again, people in power, corporations, the media, they realize that the people want Medicare for All so much, but actually giving the people what they want and what they need would mean the rich people will lose a lot of money. So what do they do to fight back? They have other politicians who are running for president come up with plans that have Medicare for All in the title to trick you into thinking they're on your side. So Pete Buttigieg's plan is called Medicare for All Who Want It. Elizabeth Warren's plan is very similar to Pete's, But then after 2 years, then she'll make it like Bernie's Medicare for all. That's what she's saying. So wait, yeah, Medicare for all who want it sounds pretty good. Like people who actually like their private health insurance companies get to keep it, and everybody else gets Medicare. That sounds like a win-win, except it's not. The way a single payer system works is that the more people are part of that system, the lower the prices get. So with any health insurance, healthy people who don't get sick pay into it too. Just like with the fire department. Even if your house isn't on fire, you pay taxes so the fire department will put out other people's fires. And the less people pay into the system, the more expensive it gets for those who pay for it. So again, fire station analogy, if half of the people suddenly could decide, oh, we're not going to pay for fire stations anymore, you still have the same amount of fires you need to put out, but you have half as many people paying for it. So everybody who is still paying for it has to pay twice as much. And so people get sick of it and say the fire department costs us too much, even though they save lives. So even though the fire department is just as effective as it's always been, people's opinion on it gets super low. And so, yeah, in the case of healthcare, if less people opt in to Medicare for all, it's going to cost a lot more. Medicare for all who want it means that prices are going to be super high because private healthcare insurance companies will try to keep as many of the healthy people as possible and push as many sick people onto Medicare for all who want it. So yeah, prices are going to be super high still, probably a little lower than private healthcare companies, but not by much, and nowhere near as affordable as actual Medicare for all. People will think like, oh, we already did Medicare for all and it barely helped, and lose enthusiasm for it. So that's why I think Pete Buttigieg's plan is actually pretty nefarious. People will see that Medicare for all who want it doesn't actually help that much, and it's going to lose popularity. They'll think like, oh, Medicare for all is a failed system, when it isn't even Medicare for all. And that's exactly what private health insurance companies and the rich and powerful want. So yeah, the same thing with Warren's transition plan, which, like I said before, is essentially Pete's plan, except she wants to transition to real Medicare for all in the 3rd year. Same thing will happen. People will barely see their bills go down. And by the time the 3rd year comes around, she's like, okay, now let's do Medicare for all. The energy for that movement will be gone because she's enacted a half-hearted version of it earlier. Nothing against Warren. I actually like her quite a bit. But I am not a fan of her plan for healthcare at all. Not to mention, if we do Medicare for all who want it, the private health insurance companies, again, will do whatever they can to help to keep healthy people and push all the sick onto Medicare. So Medicare will have to pay a lot to treat all the sick people, but their prices won't go down because the healthy people are all on other health insurance plans. Also, Medicare for all who want it, again, takes away that choice of doctor. Private health insurance will give incentives to doctors so that they choose not to work with Medicare. And again, you, the consumer, will have little to no choice. So for me, the only plan that's legitimate is Medicare for all. This is the only plan that's actually going to help us a significant amount. And it's the only plan that is like all the other developed countries in the world who are able to pay for their citizens' healthcare. And I won't pretend there are not legitimate concerns with Medicare for all. If you get rid of private health insurance companies, what happens to everyday people who work there? So Bernie does address this in his plan, and I believe it's quite sufficient, but if I go into it anymore, this video will go on forever. All these issues that we care about are actually all like interconnected, and my voice is dying. So I could link healthcare to climate change, race relations, feminism, etc., but this is already such a large subject, so we'll leave it at that. So yes, out of all the healthcare plans, I endorse Bernie's, and I have a litany of other reasons why I support Bernie Sanders for president, but I won't get into all of that now. Suffice it to say that the vast majority of his policies make much more sense and are actually geared towards helping the American people and not helping big corporations and the like. I'll make another video about why I like Bernie Sanders at some point and why I am voting for him and why I think everybody should vote for him. Definitely want to get that done before the Iowa caucuses, which are coming up very, very soon. But yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought, if you have any thoughts about what I've been talking about with healthcare. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, friends.